I'm I'm here today with Len Saputo, who is in California. Specifically, I've forgotten your suburb.
In Orinda,
Arinda, yes. And I'm
suburb of
here,
San Francisco.
yeah, out there in the nicer climate on the other side of
True.
the Caldecott Tunnel. And I'm John Travis here in Mullumbimby. It's December 3rd here, I think, which makes it December 2nd there,
Right.
2019. And Len, you and I go back even farther than we knew, in that when I was an intern at Highland the month of March in 1970, you were running around bossing interns, residents around. But we didn't meet each other for quite a while later.
Well, it's kind of ironic, Jack, because, at that time I was your mentor, and then you immediately, along with Marty Rossman, knew that medicine, the way it was practiced, wasn't going to be the way you did it. And so you started doing the things that it took me 25 years to figure out, and you became my mentor.
Well, our paths have gotten a lot more entwined lately, but so
Absolutely.
my goal today is to find out who you are and why, and a little bit of the what along the way, but primarily going back to your roots, like where did you grow up, and was there any, what were the early influences that led you in the direction of health?
Well, I grew up in an Italian family where there were a lot of doctors. So I've got
Oh,
a tattoo on my backside that I was born with that has MD on it. And that's how I got started with it. When I was 4 years old, I wasn't playing with fire engines. I was playing with the toy stethoscope because I knew what I was going to be then. And I never really questioned it. I just went along with it. And I didn't know that much about it, but I knew I wanted to help people. And that's what it's all been about. And the journey in knowing how to help people has been very revealing.
mm-hmm. And was your father a doctor then, or siblings,
No, my
or
dad was a barber.
ah,
My mother's side
whereabouts?
in Berkeley, actually, right off the campus of University of California.
There was a farm.
No, no, he was a barber.
Oh, I thought you
He
said a
cut hair.
farmer.
He cut hair.
Oh, okay. Um,
So it wasn't that led me to it. It was my mother's side, really. They
uh-huh.
had a long line of doctors who I never met. They all were in Italy.
Oh, okay. So it was by word of mouth.
And by command.
Yeah, I decided about age 5, and I did have an old stethoscope too that my dad subtle plants that they
Yeah.
laid on us.
Well, it wasn't just plants. It was a lot of pressure.
Uh-huh.
And and it turned out all right. I wasn't really wanting to do that. I wanted to play tennis. I was a pretty good tennis player and I wanted to play the circuit, but it didn't happen that way. And I didn't really enjoy medicine when I was going through the training or going through the first 15, 20 years of my practice. And then it all fell together. And I realized that I was in the right field, but there were some things that I didn't like about how it was managed
Uh-huh.
and how we practice. The same things you found out 20 years prior to that. And then the journey began uh, and has progressed to where we are today.
Well, just for a little bit of background more, you went to med school where?
At Duke University in North Carolina. And
How'd
then
you
I went,
wind up there from Berkeley?
the only place I got into that was any good, I applied to about 15 schools and 14 of them said no. And then a week before that, I was actually not sure I was going to go or not. They called me and said, "Would you like to come?" And I said, "You bet." So everything happened from there on. And when I got there, they reminded me that I was an alternate. And they said, "We skipped over another alternate to put you in there. So you're the last person who was accepted to the Duke class of 1965." And
Oh,
and he said, "You want to know the reason why?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "I'm not so sure, but okay, tell me." He says, "Because you're my doubles partner." He
oh.
wanted a tennis player. So
So
we
you
played a
must
few we played a few tennis tournaments together.
And then from there, an internship.
At the University of Pittsburgh, actually, in internal medicine. I took the research training program at Duke, and I was all set to go to NIH to become a research scientist. And I was at the University of Pennsylvania or University of Pittsburgh for about 2 weeks. And my wife at the time, my first wife, says, "I'm going back to California with our son. Are you coming?" And I thought, gosh, I've got some work to do here. Maybe what I should do is go talk to my mentor, the chief of medicine. So I'll leave him nameless because he turns out to be somebody I don't admire at all. And I told him what my problem was. And he said, "Saputo, you've got some problems, but I'll guarantee you one thing. If you leave this internship program, I'll see to it you never pass your boards." And he said, and I'm the chairman of internal medicine nationally. So I said, "Well, you made my mind up real quick. I'm leaving." And the only place I could get into was Highland Hospital. So, and then it was only because one person dropped out, but it was close to where I lived and where my wife's family and my family were. And that changed everything. There's nobody from Highland Hospital is going to go to the NIH in a research program to become a research scientist. It's just the wrong place. But I actually did an internship that was rotating. I delivered 120 babies. I did a rotation in pediatrics and in OBGYN. It was fantastic. I actually discovered that it was helping people that I wanted to do, not research. So it's interesting how the universe leads you around and gives you choices, and that it puts pressure on you. We don't make the one that you're really best suited for until you finally get what's going on.
So then you went into practice, you said, for 15 years?
Well, I finished my internal medicine residency at Highland, and then I was drafted into the service for 2 years where I did all kinds of things. I didn't know anything, but I thought I did. And then started an internal medicine practice in Walnut Creek, where I joined the John Muir Medical Center, where I practiced for about 35 years. That's when things started to really change. I knew after about 20 years that I didn't want to be just doing internal medicine the way I was trained. I had to do something that was actually going to help people that in a way that was deeper than just fixing their symptoms, getting them back on their feet and back to work.
So now I recall reading some of this, that your tennis revival had something to do with your transition as well.
Well, you can't give what you don't have. And what I didn't have was a lot of self-confidence that I could do things that are out of the ordinary much. And I played tennis all the way through college for UC Berkeley. And I probably could have played on the tour at that time, but I didn't. And I went to medical school, and for the next 12 years, really, I didn't pick up a racket much. But when I got into practice in Walnut Creek, I decided that I wanted to open a practice, and there were no patients really. There were just a few. So I got interested in tennis, and I built a tennis club there and started playing some tennis tournaments and got good again. And over about the next 20 years or so, became a very good tennis player as a senior tennis player. And at one point was ranked 1 in the world in men's singles. And at that point, looked back and said, "What are you doing? The world's not a big tennis court." But it gave me confidence. It was like a stepping stone in building a confidence that I knew I could do something and I could be special in a way that I could respect. And then things started falling together, and I started questioning, what am I doing in medicine, really? I'm practicing stuff that I don't have a great deal of satisfaction in. I'm hurting some people doing the things I was trained to do. A lot of what I learned in medical school and residency turned out to be wrong in terms of what the literature said, and I kept up on it pretty much. So everything changed. And then I started looking at ways to do things differently. And really the biggest event in my life that changed things was in the late 80s. My wife got sick with a condition that's at the time thought to be very rare. They thought she was only one of 25 cases in the world that had something called primary anaphylaxis. means you just have recurrent anaphylactic reactions for reasons that they can't describe. They don't know the cause for. And they were very serious. I had to resuscitate her a couple times.
Wow.
And in Western medicine, we weren't going to solve it. You know, my good allergists out here, a good friend of mine, helped and said, I think you need to be on steroids and antihistamines and probably the rest of your life. Went to immunology grand rounds at Stanford. They said, yeah, that's what you've got. You just have to be on prednisone. And then everything started to hit the fan because of the side effects of prednisone.
Yeah.
And so I thought we were going to lose her from the treatment. And then I ran into a guy named Russ Jaffe. I don't know if you know Russ or not.
Oh, yeah, Russ. Uh-huh.
He's probably on your show. He's a tremendous fountain of knowledge. And we got to be good friends. And the only reason I met him is because I had a patient who had done this test called the ELISA ACT test. And I didn't know what it was or how it worked. And the doctor who ordered it didn't know how it worked. So I called Russ at Seramune Labs in Reston, Virginia, and said, what is this test you're doing? I don't understand it, and I need to know it because I've got a patient who took it, and we're not solving her problems. So he says, I'll tell you what, I'm coming out in 2 weeks. Why don't we get together? So I invited him over for dinner. So we had him over for dinner about 6 o'clock, and about 11:30, I finally got to the point where I understood the test. And it wasn't that complicated, but at that time it was a stretch for me. And he says, and I told him about Vicky's situation. He said, that's exactly what I've been trying to tell you, is that your wife's condition is not so rare as you think, and I know how to fix it. So we did the test, and it was totally different from what we found in mainstream medicine. There we found no things she was sensitive to. And then this test, which showed delayed hypersensitivity reactions that can cause anaphylaxis, she had 42 things she was sensitive to. Things like olive oil and garlic and cosmetics and household cleaning agents. And it was a big revelation. I remember when I showed her the test results, she just started crying and said, I can't do this. I can't eat anything. I can't use the products I'm used to. So we got rid of all that. And over the next 3 months, everything went away. And she hasn't had an anaphylactic reaction since that time. And all these anaphylactic reactions left. Now she can eat what she wants. And it had to do with things that have to do with leaky gut and dysbiosis, which is still not in the mainstream medicine 30 years later. It's hard to believe. I mean, there's so much literature to support it. But that was a turning point for me. Then I knew that I had to do things that went beyond where my training stopped and opened some new horizons. And that's when I started thinking. I took the red pill, right? Got out of the box and could see some of the challenges we're facing that were just silly. I mean, why would we just be in a pharmaceutically based practice with some technology and surgeries when there are all these other things that have been around for a long time, like acupuncture and homeopathy and chiropractic and Ayurveda and Native American medicine and blah, blah, blah. So I started something where I could get together with my colleagues called the Health Medicine Forum. And that was in 1994. And
I remember hearing about that in Marin.
Yeah, well, we had a meeting a year or two before that with Russ Jaffe and Raymond Francis and a group of people like that. There were about 10 of us trying to define what the new medicine would be, what we would call it. And we came up with health medicine. Health, because obviously health is the paradigm, the wellness and the thriving. And the medicine, not because of drugs and surgeries and what we're trained, but in the spirit of healing. So that name caught on. And then I spent the next 15 years trying to define what it meant at our forum. And we had thousands of people who came. There were times we had 500 or 600 people at a meeting that we would have, and learned all kinds of things through show and tell of all the different disciplines that wanted to show themselves at our events. And a lot of those meetings were just 50 or 100 people, but we divide ourselves in groups, and we would listen to each person present what they did. And we learned about things that we thought were quackery based on what the profession told us. They thought chiropractors were people who tried to cure cancer with manipulation, and there couldn't be anything to homeopathy because there's nothing in it. And of course, when you ask them about how did it work and why do you think that, there was no answer. It's just that, well, it isn't medicine and we know we're right, so that's what we're going to do. That for me was a big turnoff.
Yeah.
So that's when I started having these meetings, and we had 350 events over the next 15 years that I emceed, and I got an education in what.
Would you have had a meeting in Marin in someone's home with let's see, someone else I knew was there. I think I came to one.
Mhm.
Um, did you ever do that in Marin at a house?
I could have. We did so many of them that I can't remember all of them. It was in 1994 too,
Yeah.
so could easily have been. I mean, sometimes we had a meeting a week, yeah, and through that process, we tried to learn how it is that you could help people the best way. So I went from a paradigm where we thought we knew everything because we were doctors, right?
Yeah.
And it
Masters,
has,
medical
yeah,
deities.
yeah, exactly. That's right. And assumed that all other disciplines, if they weren't consistent with what we had, were wrong.
Mhm.
And I thought, well, some of them have been around for thousands of years. Why in the world am I going to assume that they're no good when I don't know anything about them? So I committed at that time to say, I'm going to learn the best I can. So I got this idea that we could treat people more integratively in a way where we bring different practitioners of different disciplines together with the patient, what's called a healing circle, for a couple of hours. We'd ask them to write an autobiography of themselves, their physical health from birth to now, their emotional health from birth to now, and their spiritual health from birth to now. And so we can kind of know about them, because not all of the people who we'd bring together in these panels that might consist of somebody who did Ayurveda and a psychologist and an internist and somebody who does
Mhm.
Chinese medicine or homeopathy, and thought we could, at least from the scientific point of view, put together what it was that each of these disciplines could do that could help our patient. And what I learned from that is that we all kind of came to the same place. It really surprised me. So I thought, well, they're doing it in a way that's totally foreign to anything I learned. And now I'm finding out that they're saying the same thing, but doing it in a different way. Maybe I should listen. And then it got even deeper, because I found that it wasn't just the science of how you would help somebody to relieve them of their symptoms and make them feel better so they get back on their feet and back to work, without looking at the deeper reasons for why they get sick. And now it gets really tricky, because if you're going to believe in science, that's one way that we can look at things. And back 400 years ago, when Descartes came along and his peers, that's when we had the scientific method become the golden rule, or the way, like the holy grail of how we would solve things. But they didn't have the metrics to study what spirituality was all about. So they just threw it out and said, we don't know what to do with this. Give it back to the church. They can mess with it the best that they want. Not our problem. The dumbest, worst science you could ever have. If you don't understand something, throw it out.
Throw it out.
Yeah. And so now we live in a world that's evolving, but still primarily based in logic and math and science. You know, Einstein has a wonderful quote that I have in one book that I read on science and spirituality and medicine, that says basically the job of the physicist is to understand how the cosmos works using science and logic and math. He says, good luck. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. Good luck. It can't be done that way. You're not going to understand it, but the way you can know about it is through your intuition and experience. Bingo.
Mm-hmm.
Now you can put things together in a model that's quite different from what I was trained in, that goes back 400 years and makes the correction of what was done at that time that was a big mistake, and move into the intuitive side of what guides you to help people. Science has got so many problems that I've almost given up that you can learn things that you can count on, because it keeps changing. First of all, there are too many variables. You can't control the variables. And that's why you do a study one time and it turns out one way, and you do it 10 more times and it comes out in all different ways. And then worst of all, you have these conflicts of interest. Who does the study? The people with the money who have a secondary gain. They call it primary gain, because what they're really after is a return on their investment to make money. And who has all that money? Big pharma. NIH 10 years ago spent $32 billion a year on research. Big pharma spent $92 billion a year on research.
Mhm.
Do you think they're really going to do research, spend a couple $100 million on a project that comes out negative and say, well, turns out it's no good, so we're not going to, I think you shouldn't buy our product. What they do is they lie through their teeth trying to protect their investment because they're a business, not a service. They claim to be a service, and they do some good things that are service, and they're invaluable, but you can't get straight information. So can you trust the information that's in the literature that we doctors use to treat our patients? And the answer is a clear no. Marcia Angel, I don't know if you've interviewed her or know her.
No, I don't know her.
She was the editor-in-chief of the New England Journal of Medicine. Catherine DeAngelis, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of American Medical Association. Ushman Neal, the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Clinical Investigation. All three of them came out and said, there's nothing published in these journals that we think is solid. The amount of good science that's in here, according to three sources, is about 15%. 85% is not. And when you look at the medical information that's in the articles of these three journals that I mentioned, you can't trust it. About 1% is solid science. The other 99% you can't trust. And what do we do as doctors? We read the abstract, think we got the article all worked out because we trust that what they say is true, and it's not. You wind up, that's why the three institutions that studied that are different from those people I just mentioned, came up with a number of 15% of medicine is pretty good science, 1% of the literature is solid science. So we're stuck in a place where we're really in trouble. So that's why I've made the shift from thinking I was a scientist and trusting the stuff that's published in the medical journals and changing my mind about it. And now using my intuition and my imagination and learning from the experience that I have with that and bringing that into the way I practice medicine. So when I'm working with a patient, it takes a long time. I don't hardly ever see somebody for less than 2 hours in an initial visit, and I bill them for one because I don't think it's about money. I think it's about service. And you get to know them. What makes them tick? How are you? What matters in your life? What are the challenges you're facing? How well do you sleep? Do you like your job? How's your family? Those are the big questions to ask, not looking for some rare parasite that's going to cause a unknown disease that you can't fix. I mean, and it doesn't mean that you can't do a lot of good things in medicine. Obviously you can. It's about integrative medicine. It's about integral medicine, meaning you're looking at the person's whole life story and how that's unfolded and how that's affected them and how they've developed and what their problem is. Have they gotten a message from the universe when they get sick that's an opportunity to learn from things? I think so. So there's a long answer to your question, but that's where the guts of medicine really is. It's not about drugs and surgeries and technologies, even though they play a very important role a lot of the time in what we do. So I don't want to just badmouth medicine, but I don't want to put it on a pedestal either. I don't want to have the mind and the medical things that are available be the most important thing, because it's not, you have to understand, you have to feel, you have to be with people, not treat them a set of symptoms with a bag of tools.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah, well, so I learned some of that from you, Jack.
Well, this is probably a good time for you to hold up a copy of your book so our viewers can see that you've described it in more detail.
Yeah, there it is.
There it is. And this was your health medicine meetings sound like they were running in parallel with a lot of other things that historically I'm trying to document. From originally we called it holistic medicine, and then there was complementary alternative, and there was functional medicine and orthomolecular, and all of these attempts, I think, to get at the same problem of the Descartesian or the Cartesian limitations of consciousness being
Yes.
excluded.
Yeah.
What did you have any interactions with the folks in those other disciplines back in
All
those
of
days?
them. All of them. Yeah. But they're all different.
Uh-huh.
See, what I practice is really integral medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And and holistic is the biggest word that looks at that, because I'm looking at the whole person. And I'm not just looking at the whole person as the whole story. It's about their life story and how they integrate with their families and their community, and about how they work, how they fit in with their planet, and ultimately with their cosmos. And we're an aspect of all those things. You could be holistic and say, person is a whole thing. He's more than the sum of his parts. Yeah, of course that's true. But that's not all. And holistic is much bigger than that. There's a whole spiritual side to things. I mean, the universe is incredibly perfect and complicated. And we need to have trust and faith that things that happen in our lives aren't just accidents. I think everything that happens has a meaning and a purpose, no matter what it is. A 2-year-old baby gets bit by a tsetse fly and dies. I have trust and faith that there was purpose in that. It wasn't like it was just bad place, wrong time. You could say, well, you're a silly fool, Len, and maybe I am. But that's what I have learned to have trust and faith in after practicing medicine for more than 50 years. I want to know what my patient's life story is and how it relates to what their problem is. And that makes a whole different story out of it. The stuff about functional medicine, sure, it's important, but it's only one small aspect of how you look at how people work. It looks at a biochemical side of it, but it's not a spiritual thing. And you look at integrative medicine, okay, you're looking at different styles of practice, which is important. That's why we did the Health Medicine Forum. There are lots of ways to look at what we do. Complementary and alternative medicine, I hate those terms, because what they really should be called is pioneering medicine. That's the cutting edge of where research in medicine is moving. And we should honor that and have a look at it. And we should have a level playing field where the National Institutes of Health, which is our organization, the people's organization, should be doing research on things like what you do in wellness, about how to thrive, because our work is about what makes people thrive, what makes them happy, what gives them that inner smile.
Yeah.
Those are the things that have real meat on it. It's not getting you back to, you can go back to do the job you don't like, or to the marriage that's failing, or to try and fix your kids who are in drugs, or try to lose weight because America's fat, or the things that we have in this sickness paradigm are distracting us. It's like we've all swallowed the blue pill, and we just go on doing it over and over again without any attempt to really go deeper and try to find meaning and purpose to what's happening and trust our intuitive sense. It's like it's too big a gap, and it doesn't help to make the culture work better when you have values that are materialistic and self-centered and narcissistic, rather than the reverse of what we need is about giving, sharing, and loving and building community. You ask me who I am, I'm a person who wants to see people thrive and to build community and teach the principles of what's necessary to be able to do that, rather than just repeat the same old story and think that that's okay. We got to do something to have values that give us that inner smile. And we can do that, but we have to evolve. It's not going to happen by revolution. Revolutions only revolve. Evolution changes things, changes the paradigm. New way of looking at things, a more real way, if we can figure that out and we can trust ourselves to be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I remember when we couldn't use the S word, spiritual, in public. And,
Right.
that has shifted, from Larry Dossey talking about prayer and,
Yeah.
so a few of us weirder ones talk about it now. It's still not getting covered in the New England Journal, but
No, no, you do it's not about a reductionistic approach to analyzing things. We don't have to cut it small pieces and use electron microscopy to kind of figure out how something works. It's more about looking at how the thing works as a whole, and then study that from that perspective, and recognize that we're an aspect of the whole cosmos, and we're important, even though we're one grain of sand on what I call the beaches of the cosmos. Seems infinitesimal and unimportant. But if it was infinitesimal and unimportant, I don't think we'd be here. I don't think that the cosmos wants to get along without every living molecule that exists. And I think that everything that we think and do affects every molecule in the cosmos. Not a lot, but the cosmos can't be whole without you. So all of a sudden you become a valuable aspect of what the cosmos is, and you contribute to it. And I think that's the collective message of what holism is about in the broadest sense. And that's what floats my boat now. And it's not like I can go into my practice and just practice that way, because people come to me because they have symptoms and they want to get better. And for some of them, this kind of thing is the wrong approach. You don't want to tell somebody who's just gotten cancer that they've got a special lesson to learn. It's probably not going to be a good idea.
yeah.
But down the road, there'll be very few of them that won't have learned something they could not have learned had they not had it.
Mm-hmm.
So you pay your nickel and take your chances, make your choices. But I don't think we're going to find any answers, actually, from science that tell us about what the cosmos is, what the elements of it is. We don't know the first thing about what light or gravity or electricity are. Not a clue. We can only describe them. And the only way we can know about them is because we experience them. But that's different than chopping them up in pieces and trying to understand how they work, because you can't. So where have you got to go? You're stuck. Either you become respective of your spiritual essence and try to make the cosmos a better place, or you can do the narcissistic things that we do in this culture that have led us to be divided, antagonistic, competitive, and not building community. And that's what we're living in. I think that's why Mother Teresa, when she was in New York, said, "I've never seen such wealth amongst such depravity." And right on. And that's what you're about too, I know.
I don't know who it was I first heard it from, but saying that America was the world's largest experiment in loneliness.
Oh, yeah. We're separate.
Yeah.
Even though you can look at yourself as separate, better take the red pill so you can learn something about a way to approach it. And when you do that, life becomes different. It has a special meaning, and it's comforting, and it puts that inner smile back in your heart. And that's what I think thriving is about.
Getting down to some specifics, you opened your current practice there in Walnut Creek how many years ago?
No, it was in 1971, year after we were together.
But when did you start calling it the Health Medicine Center?
Oh, I started it in about 94, something like 95, something like that.
Around the same time you were doing the
yeah, a little
meeting.
After that. Maybe it was more like 1998. I can't remember exactly when it was. And at the time, I called it the Health Medicine Institute. Mm-hmm. We had 5,000 square feet, about 15 practitioners of different disciplines. We even had a Native American Indian chief who was incredibly valuable. That was a very good time. But the problem was, it was about 2008 that it all fell apart, when the economy turned and people didn't have as much money they wanted to spend on healthcare, and the integrative approach was a luxury rather than something that they felt they had to have. And so things went back to the way they were. I couldn't make it financially work at that point, so I had to close it. And I started the Health Medicine Center after about 7 years of that. And now I have a small office with a few trusted people that do very special work that I'm proud to be connected with. And we have an integrated approach that's holistic, that honors the kinds of things that I've been talking about today with you.
Right, and both Yvonne and I have experienced that recently, and her back being so much better. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. Well, we did a lot of we did technology on her primarily. We didn't get into all the spiritual stuff as much as I'd like to, because I think you can do that better yourself with her, and you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, that you see yourself probably not retiring anytime soon. You're still going strong. At what, you're pushing 80?
Yeah, I'll be 80 in February, just a couple of months from now.
Uh-huh.
But I've never been more productive, and my mind is sharper than it's ever been. And I really love what I do. I'm not going to retire. I have not made a dime in my practice in 10 years, and I work full time. In fact, I can't even make ends meet. I've got to put money in the practice every year to keep the doors open, but I get to do what I want. And for me, that's what really matters. It's not about having a Porsche or 2 houses or boats. I don't care about stuff like that. What I care about is building community, about teaching people how they can get better and how they can begin to do it in a non-narcissistic way, because that's the way that the United States works. It's about being better than your neighbor, having a better car or a better house or bigger Christmas tree. I mean, it's just nonsense, because even if you have millions and millions of dollars, that's not going to bring you happiness. You have to have something that really does something that contributes, that makes you feel good about being alive. And money doesn't do that. That buys you things. And unfortunately, your things own you. I say, poor Bill Gates. He's got to manage all that money. I hate doing that. I'd rather be broke.
It's never a problem I've had to deal with.
Well, that's because you're a natural healer, right? And you believe these same things.
Yeah.
I wish you'd have taught me those back when you were the intern and I was the chief resident. It would come full circle.
Well, I'd like to go off for a minute into the technological part, just because I think historically you're leading the way that will, I hope, will become adopted and recognized with the lights, the photon therapy. So how did you first get into that? And just tell us some about how that fits in practice.
Yeah. Using light as medicine is what I learned. And it was in 1999 that I met Maurice Bales. And I only met him because I was reading one of the throwaway medical journals that we have that usually have a lot of ads in them, but I was just casually reading it for entertainment. And I saw this article that talked about light therapy and what it did. And I thought, oh, really? And I was about to throw the journal out when I went ahead and saw that there was a local phone number for the person. So I called him. And I said, why do you print stuff like that? And he says, you sound like everybody else. He says, I'm an electrical engineer, and I've been doing this for a few years, and I can tell you it really works. Now, I'll tell you what, why don't you bring 2 patients by who have pain, and then we'll talk about it. And I thought, well, okay. The guy sounds sincere. Even though I didn't want to waste my time, I knew that I should at least give it a try. That's what the Health Medicine Forum was all about. So I brought 2 patients there. One had MS, and the other had a failed back syndrome, horrible pain. And the guy with MS, for the most part, was bedridden. He had too much pain. He was all crumpled over. But he got out of his bed, he got on his crutches, and he came to the office. And in about 15 or 20 minutes, that man was more upright. He had less pain. He had a smile on his face. And I'm going, what the heck was that? And then we treated the guy with back pain, and he got a bit better. And so Maurice looked at me, and he said, why aren't you more interested in this? And I said, well, maybe I am. He says, I'll tell you what. Why don't we meet and bring more patients here? And I said, okay. And we agreed on meeting on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays from 5 to 7 after work with 2 or 3 patients. We did that for 3 months. And I got the education of my life. I saw people getting better from conditions that they're not supposed to get better from, and doing it sometimes in just 15 minutes with a 15-minute treatment. And so when that period was over, he looked at me and he said, "What do you think now, Mr. Smart Guy?" And I said, "Well, I guess you win. I'd like to start." And he says, "Well, I can't find any other doctors to do this because they won't listen." And I said, "Well, I'm listening and I'd like to do it." And he says, "Okay." So he set me up with the expensive equipment. He says, "You can have it. Just practice it and talk to me if you have problems." That was 20 years ago. Since that time, we've learned how the light works, at least some of how it works. And we know the conditions it treats. And all I can say is it's mind-blowing. We can treat people with diabetic neuropathies in 15 minutes. People who have pain and numbness and they don't have much balance, they may come in a wheelchair and walk out. And that's routine. I mean, it's crazy it works so well. And for other neuropathies, it works well too, but the diabetics are really special. And people with back pain, with sciatica, come in, walk out without any pain or sciatica. Now, you're not just going to treat them one time and solve the problem. You may have to treat them a dozen times or 24 times for 15 minutes or 30 minutes to get the desired effect. And then we found we could treat people who had neurological conditions. People with MS were having recoveries that were dramatic. And people with Alzheimer's disease and traumatic brain injuries and ALS were getting incredibly better. People who were not able to function much are just not like vegetables, but we treated some that are like vegetables and they get better and they may not come back, they won't come back to normal life, but there are a few people that have come back to full function in 15 or 20 minutes with one treatment. And you're looking there going, what was that? How does that happen? And we know that probably the main effect that this light has is that it increases the production of the body's energy called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. It's the energy currency of the body. And in cells that are malfunctioning, it increases the production of energy by 50, 75%. It raises the membrane potential. Cells start to function again. And so somebody who has a neuropathy or MS may have a dramatic change in how they feel in just a short time because you put that energy back in there. And once you kickstart it, they stay that way. And you may treat a diabetic with neuropathy once every year or two, or you may have to treat them once a week. They're all different. So ATP production is a big thing. But the other thing it does is it increases the production of nitric oxide, which is that chemical that as soon as it is released in a blood vessel, causes an increase in circulation. So if you had angina and you put that over your chest because there's coronary artery constriction, in a couple of minutes, the pain would be gone, the circulation would be improved, and you'd be back to where you were before you had the attack. And you can do that with a lot of conditions where there's a problem with poor blood flow. It reduces inflammation. It increases lymphatic drainage. It kills microbes. It even kills MRSA infections. And there's literature behind all this stuff. I'm the messenger. So don't shoot me. You just realize that this literature is out there, and it's coming out of big places. The neurological stuff is coming out of Harvard and the Boston VA and the University of Boston, a lot of stuff out of Toronto, and there's some work in Europe. And this is published stuff. Nobody's listening, and the FDA is not supporting it, and the pharmaceutical industry hates it, and they've literally stopped us cold.
Have they tried to buy up Maurice and put him out of business?
They haven't yet, but it will come to that at some point in time. Yeah. But I'll tell you, they'll have to get rid of him because he would never do it. They're not going to have them buy it, put on a shelf, and not be able to help people. So
how many other crazy docs like you are doing this? Is there a network? Are you underground?
There are probably a few hundred people in the US that are starting to use light in their practice. The problem is they don't know what they're doing. You need to be able to see what you're doing as you're treating. So we use infrared imaging. We've got an infrared camera that measures to a 100th of a degree centigrade. It's really sensitive. So you can see the thermal changes on the skin as you're treating people that correlate with improvement in people's function. And I've learned those patterns now, so I know when I'm doing it, what's happening. So for example, I have a person with back pain, you'll see inflammation and heat all over their back in places it shouldn't be. And as you're treating them over the next 15 minutes, as you treat in real time, you can watch the screen and see these thermal changes coming back to normal, which means their function's normal. And that I've correlated with how they feel. So when you treat somebody who has a pain someplace in their feet or their sports injury or their back or their neck or their TMJ or whatever it is, they watch it happen and see it on the screen. So you get a nice placebo effect to add to it. So when I'm done with treatment, I say, okay, walk around, tell me how you feel. And they're going, wow, I don't believe it. I've had this for 20 years and a lot of it's gone. And it's not like everybody responds that way. And I'd say on average, you got to treat people for a couple of weeks and sometimes twice a day, as you know, before you can get the effect that you're looking for. So if I sound like I'm excited, it's because I am. This is the best kept secret in medicine in 50 years of practice that I have seen. And it's the worst thing I've ever seen the community, the people who are in charge of things stifle it and hold it back, because the problem is it's not reimbursable in insurance. And you're doing a procedure that probably is worth $400 or $500 because of what you're doing, at least on the scale of how things are in our culture, for a 15 or 30-minute visit. I charge $60 for a 15-minute visit because I can't stand the idea of having something that I know works, that I can help you with, and say, you got to pay more or I'm not going to do it. I mean, what kind of a person does that? Values have to be all messed up. And I don't fault people for that because that's how the culture works and they teach you. So if you've got 2 Porsches and 2 houses and 2 boats, you're successful, right? Well, I don't have any of those things. And I think I'm successful because I got the smile on the inside that says, I helped somebody who was really in trouble. And a lot of people, they come in and they're in tears when it's over. They can't believe it. Why isn't everybody doing this? Just like Maurice asked me 20 years ago. And I said, why isn't everybody doing it if it's so good, Maurice?
Well, as who was it? Max Planck said, science advances one funeral at a time.
Well, it's true. That's unfortunately true. What we have to do is evolve as a culture, and we haven't done that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We haven't really found a way to build community and have that be the most important thing. Yeah. We want personal comforts. We want to have people respect us. We want to be important. And so we'll do what we have to. We'll jump through the hoops we have to have everybody validate that, yeah, you're a good person and you're pretty smart and you did something good here. And so the person who's the icon for that is probably somebody like Bill Gates or George Soros. So people who have billions and billions of dollars. I feel sorry for them. Yeah, I wouldn't trade them for all the money or all the tea in China. It's not worth it. Because they can't have the smile I've got or that you've got. It doesn't come with the territory. So that kind of evolution is what the culture needs. And when we do that, it's a slam dunk. And then we won't have all these problems where every Republican votes one way and every Democrat votes the other way. I mean, how stupid can it get? And how revealing can it be that there's corruption every place? And it's about trying to cheat somebody out of something so you can have more and go home back to your same old problems, or your kids are blah, blah, blah. You know the story.
So I feel like we've reached near closure here. If you have any parting words for future generations that we hope will find us someday in a time capsule. And
I think we need to know that we do matter. We wouldn't be here if we didn't. Mm-hmm. And what I try to do, and hope that I model that the best I can, is to show people how you can become happy by giving and sharing and building community. And that it's about helping, not about taking. It's not narcissistic. It's about love. I mean, that's where the bottom line is. If you can love yourself, really love yourself, then you can give it, but you can't give what you don't have. So I think love is a two-way street. You definitely want to share and give and help people if you can, but you also have to graciously receive it with great respect and gratitude.
Yeah.
And if we live that way, the world would be a different place. We wouldn't have to have these kinds of presentations where things are not doing as well as they could be.
Well, thank you, Len. This has been very enlightening, and glad we've captured a little snippet of your life and contributions. And
Well,
till
thank
the
you
next
for
time.
thank you for having me, and thank you for leading the way. You know, like I said, you were my student, and now you're my mentor. And now we're working together as colleagues, and it's a privilege to know you and to work with you. Thank you for having me on your show.
Amen.
Amen.